This is a local church podcast.
Hey, you did this last week too.
I'm excited, but you couldn't hear it last week.
It was true.
Unless you turn it left. Hey, This is a local church podcast. If you have found your way here, it's not by accident. God is sovereignly over all, and you listening to this is part of that. Hey. But before we jump in, I want to mention to everybody, we're on YouTube now. We have a YouTube channel.
Yes.
So if you go to YouTube, you search A Local Church Podcast, it will pop up. All of our past episodes are on there as an audio file. You just hit play, just like you would a normal YouTube video, and you listen. And if you go to Apple Podcasts, if you go to Spotify and search for A Local Church Podcast, if you do YouTube, all of them have a link in the description on how to support this channel. So we really would love for you to support us. I know we haven't asked for that in the past, but
we jokingly ask.
Yeah.
Now game time, folks. Game time.
We're trying to up the game to make this a resource for people who may be afraid of like theology and faith, and like, hey, this is an easy way to kind of jump into that conversation. Yeah. And we would love for you to support us. Yeah, you don't have to, but you can.
But the YouTube podcast is, I mean, that's where you and I, as we look at behind the scenes stuff, like it's where we're looking at turning, I don't even know, it's still going to be a podcast, obviously, but a video podcast.
Yeah, so you'll still be able to get it on audio, but we're going to really look at the video aspect of it and really pump up the YouTube channel with video. That's coming in the future. I would say in the next few months, that's going to be a real thing. We're trying to work out space and financing all that junk. So if you want to support. If you don't, hey, keep listening. It's still a free resource. So.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're listening to a local church podcast hosted by my dad, Pastor Ryan Markham. Be sure to leave a review and share this resource. Love God, love people, make disciples.
Hey, thanks for listening to that intro.
Yeah, there it was with the crazy music.
A couple things. You mentioned Thanksgiving before we started this.
Since we have posted, I have gained 5 pounds from the Thanksgiving.
We talked about cranberry sauce and all that stuff.
Yeah,
so we had talked about Thanksgiving. I want to move into Christmas.
Yeah,
It's time.
Yeah. Did you enjoy your Thanksgiving?
Plans changed. We didn't get to travel. We stayed home, kind of staycation kind of thing.
Did you eat your face off?
Not really. I mean, Thanksgiving's not my meal. I do eat a lot of turkey, mashed potatoes, gravy, rolls.
Right, we
cranberry
talked about
sauce.
that, yeah.
But I don't really go hog wild. I don't do desserts on Thanksgiving, really.
I ate a lot of food.
Really?
Yes. And it was
Christmas. It's Christmas.
Pleasant.
Stop. We're not talking about Thanksgiving.
Here we go.
Christmas. Advent.
Transition.
Advent. Hey, since you're a Latin guy, Adventus means arrival or coming into a place.
Totally means arrival.
It's Advent season. It's the time for people to look at Jesus' birth.
The waiting.
And in his return. So we're in the middle. We're in the middle, people. I think last year the sermon was, we're a people in waiting, right? Or something like that. This year was a lot. The sermon was really like, he's coming back. Like, that's kind of the aim.
Well, that makes a ton of sense with the themes that you've followed all year long.
Yeah, redemptive plan of God.
The redemptive plan of God.
This is where we're headed.
Right. Here it is. Yeah, this is the pinnacle.
Yeah, and I want to ask you a question about it.
Oh,
what's your top Christmas movie?
Oh, I thought we were talking Advent.
Flipped it on you, man. That's how you do that.
We had this conversation while I was on vacation. I know the answer to this.
But before you answer,
okay,
I want to kind of set us up.
I have top 3.
I want to set us up.
Yep.
This podcast is going to come out this coming week, right? So we're kind of we're getting ahead of ourselves, which is good.
Yes.
But I want to set up the next podcast with a top 10 list of Christmas movies. So you're going to compile a list.
Okay, fair.
Between now and the next time, I'll compile a list. We'll sync or compare. But right now, off the top of your head, I know you've already thought about it. What's your top go-to Christmas movie?
A Christmas Story.
Yeah, that you'll watch over and over. Like you'll just.
No, that's the answer.
Yeah, I'm just saying that you'll go back to and just keep watching it.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
I thought we were having a who's on first moment.
No, that's
A Christmas Story. Yes, Ryan, Christmas Story.
I'm asking you for a Christmas. No, that's a good one. That's tough. I've been going through like this list. There's this top 20 list I found. It's interesting where people place their movies.
Mm-hmm.
I like the old school, the claymation cartoons.
Oh, okay.
Rudolph.
Yeah.
Things like that.
That's good stuff.
I like Christmas Vacation a ton.
Yeah.
I like.
Are you an elf guy?
I do like Elf, but that's kind of new. My kids were like Elf, right? It's kind of a thing. I do like Gremlins. It's a Christmas movie.
Yeah. Well, if you're going down that road, then Die Hard
is up there.
Totally.
Like, all those things. Trains, planes, automobiles, right?
Okay.
Home Alone.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a ton. I'm going to go to now. This is not on anybody's list, probably.
Okay.
I'm a Bill Murray fan, and I'm going to have to go with Scrooge.
Scrooge.
It's
good call.
As a kid, like I was like,
I loved that movie.
it was late '80s, I think, early '90s. I got to look at the date. It's sometimes late '80s, early '90s. But man,
Ooh, that's
as a
good
kid,
idea.
I would just watch it.
Yes.
VHS tape. But I went back and watched it because I wanted my kids to watch it. I was like, Bill Murray's mildly inappropriate. Like in a lot of Scrooged is a lot of like one-liner zingers that I would not really want my kids to watch at this point. But
it's been a long time since I've seen it. But that movie, I remember being fond of that movie.
That was my jam. Like, because at the very end, there's what's there's a song at the very end of that movie, and it's like it's one that we just stuck. We'll have to go back anyway.
Okay,
your top 10 list.
Top 10, got it.
And I have a top 10 list. We come back. If there's something on the list that you have not watched personally, your assignment will be to watch it. So the next podcast, the third podcast from now, is like, hey, here's my review.
I'm probably
of that
not
movie.
going to put a movie on my top 10 list that I haven't seen.
No, that I haven't seen. Your 10 list is for me.
Oh.
My 10 list is for you. We're going to compare them. And if there's something on my list.
Didn't understand the rules.
Yeah, that you haven't watched.
I now have an assignment. Got it.
I don't do this all day at school, so thanks, man. Thanks for the homework.
I need you to clarify the expectations, please.
Hey, we've been looking at J.I. Packer's Concise Theology.
Yeah.
It is nor concise, but it is theology, right? Concise meaning short and brevity.
It is that.
But not concise in ideas.
Right.
Thinking, right? We've been walking through this. I think this is topic number 19. Wisdom. It's really good. Before we jump in, I had to do some digging. I was like, I got caught up in just the very first thing under wisdom. He writes a little blurb under each word each week. But under this one is God's twofold will is one. And I was like, okay.
What?
Yeah, I was like, okay. I twofold, I'm thinking Jesus, being fully God, fully man. I was kind of going down that road. I was like, that's probably not what he's thinking. So then I found something in a commentary. There's two aspects to God's will. You ready?
To God's will or wisdom?
Twofold.
Okay, to his will.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And it plays into the wisdom part.
Yeah.
Directive and perceptive. Yeah. I was like, okay. Directive is God's sovereignty ordaining everything.
Okay.
Perceptive is what God wants us to do with that through his revelation or his word.
Okay.
Right? And so keep that in mind as we jump into this.
Yeah, clearly I'm behind in my reading.
It's going to help.
I love that we're supposed to be explaining it, and I'm like, what?
I had some time, and this is what I did today, and I was like, man, I've got into it. But if you don't have a copy of Concise Theology, I really want to encourage you to just jump into theology. It's the study of God, and J.I. Packer does a really, really good job of helping the everyday lay person, the mom, the dad that has a busy schedule. You can jump into theology in and out of this book and learn, and it's really good. But God's twofold nature, I guess, or twofold will help us understand God's wisdom. When I first read this, I went to Proverbs, like, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. That's not where J.I. Packer goes. He really talks about those two things, God sovereignly ordaining things, and then what are we to do with that aspect of this. I want to read the first part and then jump into some things. The very first sentence says this: wisdom in Scripture means choosing the best and noblest end at which to aim, along with the most appropriate and effective means to it. He says so many things in the shortest amount of time. There's a lot. And here's what I came up with, and everybody knows this. To be smart is to have a lot of knowledge.
Yes.
To be wise is to take that knowledge and apply it, right? Yes. That's what I got out of that first sentence. I wish he would talk like that, but he doesn't. He talks way smarter than us.
He talk way smarter.
He talks smart. And he goes through the whole thing. And do you want to jump with anything first before I jump into that?
No.
Do you have any kind of anecdotes for that, like smart and wise? Anything?
I used to talk to my kids a lot about being smart and wise, and I would use the same language you just did, right? Smart meaning I have facts, trivia.
Yeah,
I'm a learnt feller. I can spout it off. In teacher world, we call that depth of knowledge 1.
Yeah.
So like I can regurgitate information. Wisdom is down depth of knowledge 3 or 4 in the sense of I have that knowledge and I can apply it.
Yeah.
It's much about application. What my mind directly goes to though is 1, applying it, meaning I have the knowledge and I can go and play basketball, right? I know how to dribble a ball. I have the knowledge of what dribbling looks like. 3, I can go, an application is I can go out there and do it. When you get to like levels 4 and that kind of, I think where you get into wisdom is doing it for the betterment of society, or for not just I can apply this knowledge, but I'm doing something with it that makes society better.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
that's where my mind is.
Yeah. How J.I. Packer uses this is that God in his sovereignty is wise enough that his will does a whole lot, and it is wise.
Okay.
I'm going to read a couple things to help us unpack that. He says this: the outworking of God's wisdom involves the expression of his will in both senses that the phrase bears. Now, what does that mean? The first is this: God's will is his decision or decree about what shall happen, meaning his eternal purpose, according to the counsel of his will,
the redemptive plan,
where it's for his own glory. He ordained it, right? Whatever comes to pass, God's wisdom, I guess, influences that.
Got it?
The second part of this that he says is the will of God is his command or his instruction given through Scripture as to how we, the people, right, should and should not behave.
Got it.
So God's wisdom is shown in both how he foreordains it all,
sure,
but also in the same capacity how we do it.
I like this.
Now,
it's really interesting.
It's deep.
Yeah, it is. I'm going to interrupt
Yeah.
you for a second because I get the opportunity. Shout out to our youth minister and his wife who are expecting a baby. And by the time this is out, the baby will be here, I think. But I get to teach youth tonight in his absence. And the topic that he gave me is in the image of God. And so what does in the image of God mean? 1, are we made to look like God? Yes. And 2, do the structures that God that are part of the image of God, are they there in order to glorify him? And indeed they are, until the fall of man happens. And when sin intervenes, then we ruin the image of God by our actions. No longer are we drawn closer to him, but we're drawn closer to our own glory. No longer are we, drawn closer to man in the sense of making the world a better place, but it's in the sense of manipulation and all of these things that really go contrary to God's will, what you're describing right here, because sin gets involved and we defy what Scripture tells us are the commands that we ought to do with our lives, which is God's will. Yes or no?
Yes, I like it.
Okay.
I'm going to take it a step further.
Okay.
He blew my mind.
All right.
J.I. Packer rarely does this. And I've read this book probably 2 or 3 times before us going through it.
Sure.
I had to go back because I underlined something a while back, and I was like, I forgot I underlined this. You ever do that in a book?
Course.
You underline stuff, you're like, I'm going to remember this forever. And you go back and like, I don't remember even underlining this thing.
Yeah.
Check this out because it goes along with what you said, but it also takes it a step further.
Cool.
Which made my brain melt today. Here we go. You got to be ready. Are you sitting down?
I'm sitting down. I'm ready. Bring it.
Here's where it gets crazy.
Do it.
It is sometimes hard to believe that costly obedience, right? Part of God's will, part of his foreknowing, all that kind of stuff. It puts us at a disadvantage in the world. It's all a part of a predestined plan for furthering both God's glory and our own good. Hang tight. But we are to glorify God by believing that it is so and that one day we shall see it to be so. For his wisdom is supreme and never fails. I'm going to keep going. Making known his will of precept and governing the responses of human free agency or free will to it is one means whereby God accomplishes his will of events, even when the response is one of unbelief and disobedience. Now, Paul illustrates that idea in Romans, and he says, Israel's unbelief has its place in God's plan for advancing the gospel. Now,
Right.
I just stopped there for a second.
Yeah.
I was like, God in his wisdom foreordains, sovereignly rules over all of it, even my free will,
Yes.
even the disobedience of people
Sure.
to bring about his purposes. I know that intellectually,
Yeah.
it's hard for me to see it, spiritually and how that plays out. And it, for whatever reason today,
Rocked your world.
it was like, it's there. It's
Yeah.
he writes it. He says a realization that prompts us to cry out, "Oh, the depths of the riches and wisdom of God! To him be glory forever. Amen."
It's awesome.
It's crazy.
It is
like,
crazy.
The wisdom of God is so vast and so deep and so wide, like his love.
Yeah.
He's even using my disobedience
Yep.
to bring about his will, which
Well,
is
that's I've been talking a lot about Acts,
yeah,
and we just got beyond where Acts 1:8, the theme of the entire book.
Yeah.
You will be my witnesses, and it's the beginning of the church, how it starts in Jerusalem and then goes forward. After the stoning of Stephen and the persecution that happens, and all of the believers are like, "I'm out of here."
yeah,
God used that moment, used the persecution,
yeah,
and including Saul, right, to disperse all those believers
yeah.
so that they would go to the regions
To
and
the
share
ends,
the
yeah.
gospel to the ends of the
Yeah.
world. And that's how we as Gentiles get to know that today. Like when I grasp that, it's exactly like what you're describing right now. Like the fact that God was using persecution of his church to advance his church blew my mind.
It's crazy. So if you're listening to this and you're not a believer, hey, God's still using you, right?
Yeah.
You may not realize it or experience it or even acknowledge it. How about that? But he's still the one sovereignly ordaining the things that you're going through. And I would say cry out to him while there is hope, while there's
Yeah.
time, right, to do that. I've been saying that a lot lately. Have you noticed, like in sermons, like time is limited, right?
Right.
I've watched Interstellar today, and again, there's something about time, gravity, space, all that kind of stuff. But God has opened this window from the birth of Christ, Advent, right, the first coming, to his second coming, his return. There's this window of time, and I don't think we realize it, right?
Yeah.
We don't see this closing gap, but it's closing, right?
Sure.
There's coming a day when Christ comes back, and there's not going to be like a hey buddy, turn to Christ. It'll be, oh, he's back. Everybody will know he's back.
Yeah.
Everybody will confess that he's back and that he's Lord. And so if you if you haven't placed your faith in him by that time, like, I don't want to be that doomsday guy, but that's it.
Yeah.
Like,
Everybody will know, and
Yeah.
then there's sheep and goats, and
Yeah.
it's like the judgment.
yeah. And I don't know why I've been thinking about time. Maybe it's just 'cause I'm getting older and you just start thinking about time.
Yeah.
But let's jump into this because it matches our sermon from Sunday, the sermon review. We talked about time in there. I kind of started with that this is not a once upon a time story, right? We've all grown up with once upon a time there was this prince or princess and there's a dragon or a bad guy, and then everything kind of gets cleaned up at the end. This is not a once upon a time fairy tale that a lot of people think that this is, right?
Mhm.
This Luke starts it with in those days, in Luke chapter 2, verse 1, in those days. So he's pointing to specific time, place, people, and he unpacks it for us. It's a simple story, a simple passage, but there's a lot behind it, I think, right? You want to jump in anything before we jump into it?
No, go for it.
And so Luke chapter 2, this is just verses 1 through 7. The whole chapter looks at Christ's arrival, right? But 1 through 7 sets us up with the context of it. And I want to read something from John MacArthur, pastor, theologian, writer. He says this about Luke's message. He says, Luke's simple, straightforward, unembellished language describes the most profound birth with the most far-reaching implications in the history of the world. On a night like any other night, in an obscure village in Israel, unnoticed by the world, a child was born, but while his birth was like that of every other child, the child was unlike any other child ever born, either before or since. And that's what Luke's writing about. But Luke's writing is very simple.
It is.
Concise.
That's right.
Detailed.
Yeah. And that's, I'm studying Acts. I just mentioned it with my class, and it's very, here's what happened.
It's cut and dry.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You don't have to look into it a lot.
Right.
And it gives you the details. And so I just used his words, and you made points. The first point was in those days. He's talking about Caesar Augustus. Now, if you know anything about Caesar Augustus, his name is Gaius Octavius. He's a relative of Julius Caesar, who was assassinated, I think, by the Senate, right? I think
they rose up against him.
Wasn't he the one that says
"E
tu Brutes"?
Yes. Well, I don't know if he actually said that.
That was in the
that was Shakespeare. Yeah.
But he was assassinated. 3 people come into power. Gaius Octavius was one of those 3. Rome was split, and then there were battles, wars, all kinds of junk. Gaius says, "You know what? I'm just going to take everybody out." He took all the other 2 out. He combined, or I guess reconsolidated Rome, and became Caesar Augustus.
Got it.
And he was like one of the most famous of all the Caesars. He brought peace after that time because the 3 couldn't ever get along and they kept warring. When he came to power and took out the other 2, it was a lot of peace. Not so much for the Jewish people,
right?
But for Rome itself. It brings you the question, do you ever think about Rome?
I know that's a thing. I really don't.
It was a thing like a few months ago. I think we're behind, but I do.
Do you?
But not as much as some of those people. I think some of that's fake.
I do too.
But yes, a lot of the stuff from Rome kind of plays out. But
the sun never sets on Rome, or is that was that their thing? Maybe it was England.
Maybe that was the Gladiator. I don't know.
Could be. So, but their land and possessions were huge, obviously. So
far-reaching.
This is Italy, Rome we're talking about, but they had conquered this land, and so here in Jerusalem,
they were still, I guess, occupied, right, by Roman rule. But I started the first point after a decree went out, like a decree, it's a public, rule, order that had to be followed. But there's something else at play here. All throughout the redemptive plan of God, we've seen God providentially, sovereignly working things out. Mm-hmm. It just so happens, that Ruth finds her way to Boaz's field. This is kind of the same, similar feel. Proverbs 21:1 says, "The king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will." Even though the king decrees this moment, God is still the one behind the scenes, right? Sovereignly working this stuff out.
God's will, God's wisdom. J.R. Packer.
And so there's this decree that everybody would go back to his hometown to be registered under another guy, Quirinius, governor of Syria, another real person, real place, real time. And this is all playing out into, or I guess from, God's redemptive plan. So that was the very beginning of that one.
Yeah.
And then we move into, there's a reason why Luke writes in those days, real people, real place, real time. Number 2, the house and lineage.
Yeah.
It kind of flows into this. Joseph just so happens to go back to Bethlehem. That's where he's from.
Right.
Right. You don't hear about Joseph up until this point at all. But if you go back to 2 Samuel, you'll see there was a promise between God and King David that his line's not going to, fall away. Like there's someone that's coming from his bloodline that's going to sit on the throne, right?
Yes.
Joseph, if you go to Matthew chapter 1, Joseph is in the family tree of David, right? Matthew.
Go ahead.
I'm skipping ahead.
I know you are. No. In 2 Samuel, when God makes that covenant with David, it's because David says, "I'm going to build you a temple," right? And God's like, "Yeah, you're going to build me a temple. I'm going to build the house in you."
Yeah.
And it will be your land. Isn't it one of those kinds of things?
I have to go back. I have the passage that I used. It doesn't mention the temple. Okay. However, David was going to build a temple. He didn't get to, right? His son had to do that. But 2 Samuel...
That's an aside. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's
derailed.
It's good.
Yeah.
2 Samuel 7:12 and 13, when your days are over or fulfilled and you lie down to your fathers. God's telling David through Samuel, hey, when you die, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever, right?
Yeah.
God is saying Jesus is coming.
Yeah.
The guy from the garden I promised, he's coming.
It's crazy.
Yeah, through your line.
I know. And
thousands
to
of years
think about
before.
how God's will, we talked about that earlier.
Yeah.
Like in this time, but go back to 2 Samuel.
wisdom.
Right.
Yeah.
So even before 2 Samuel, when Saul was the king, and before that, when the people were like, we want a human king, and God's like, I'm king.
Yeah.
I'm it. I'm it. And the redemptive plan that he has always known, but knew even then, I know what's going to happen. And he tells David, it's coming, it's coming. And then all the prophets, they're coming, he's coming, he's coming.
Yeah. Just hang tight.
Yeah.
Right? Listen to God, fear God.
Wow.
And it's coming. But this is not in the sermon. I want to go a little bit further. Jesus references David in Revelation 22. That is in the sermon. He says, I, Jesus, have sent my angels to testify to you about these things for the churches. He's talking to the churches, but he says, I am the root and the descendant of David, the bright morning star. Yeah. I'm the root, meaning I created David, but I'm also a descendant. His fully God, fully man.
The Lord said to my Lord.
Yeah.
That's all from Psalms.
Think about what is happening with the Old Testament Jews during the time of the judges, the kings, and God is sitting back. Jesus himself is like,
what are you doing?
Hello? Like, stop. Like, just imagine, like, you ever watch Braveheart?
Yeah.
And there's a scene where William Wallace tells his tribe, his peeps, to make big spears. And they're going to use these in battle. The Battle of Edinburgh, I think. And they set these big, long spears, tall as trees, right? They set them into the ground, and as these horses are coming, the horses hit the spears, right? But between it's like 30 seconds, you hear, hold, hold. Like, William Wallace and them just hold tight.
Yeah.
And then it happens, right? Imagine God the Father holding back God the Son in the Old Testament, saying, just hold.
Wow.
To Jesus, like, the time is going to come, right? And Jesus is like, I can fix it now, right? This is just all, just, me imagining this. But he sees our failures. He sees the failures of the Jewish people. And there's this, like, hold moment, right? He could end it all with a snap of a finger, and yet he's patient with sinful people. It blew me away just today as I was kind of going back. But so Joseph, he's from the line and lineage of David. Like, it was preordained that Joseph was coming from David, but also that he's from Bethlehem, because Micah chapter 5 references Bethlehem being the ground zero for the coming of the Messiah. And he's here, right? Verse 5, he's registered with Mary, who's betrothed with child. It wasn't required for Joseph to bring Mary with him, but God, in his sovereignty, this is all playing out. It was Caesar Augustus's decree that brought Joseph to Bethlehem. It was Joseph's will of being a good husband, bringing Mary with him to Bethlehem. But more than that, God is the one sovereignly, moving,
orchestrating it all.
Caesar Augustus to put out a decree, moving Joseph to bring Mary. Right. All of this is amazing if we just look back at it. But I want to say this, and I didn't say this in the sermon. I wish I had, because I was thinking about it today. If we see God's hand working throughout history, how much should that change our perspective when we walk through life? Like, when we go through a bad doctor's call, right? Or we go through good things or bad things. If we know this to be true, like, how should this impact or affect our reaction or our being proactive in a world around us? Right? You know what I mean?
I think, yes, I do know.
And then
exactly
why don't we?
And then why don't we
live it out?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that the answer is sin. It has to be the answer, because we do know what's right from wrong. And Paul writes about this. Like, I know what I ought to do, and I don't do it. Yeah. And and then I know what I ought not to do, and that's what I love to do. It's sin. But you just shake your head. Like, too often I look at the Old Testament and I'm like, oh my goodness, how could they? Why? Just what are they thinking? Yeah. And then today, all throughout my day, I'm like,
that's
oh,
me.
Yeah, I'm in the mirror here.
Hi,
and I don't know why, Ryan.
Me.
I think it's because of our human incapability.
What's wrong with you people?
Yeah.
It's my capacity to not understand eternity, right? Like, I can't comprehend it.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not wise enough to be able to get it. And so my existence starts and ends in a physical world.
Finite.
A finite
I have
world.
an A and B.
Right.
Well,
But
ish.
it doesn't.
Yeah,
But
ish.
that's the way it feels. Like
Yeah.
that's all I know.
Yeah.
And I have to, that's where my faith comes in, to understanding
Yeah.
that there's a bigger picture than this. But I get wrapped up in my human flaws
Ooh,
so
man.
often.
Yeah, you made me think about something. I was reading something about other religions, Confucius, Eastern religion, Eastern thought, Buddhism, things like that, Hinduism even. It's circular, right? They believe life, eternity, all of it's circular. It kind of comes back and forth.
Reincarnation
Like,
stuff?
Yes,
Yeah.
ish. That's kind of the thought, or nothingness, right? When I die, there's nothing, and I'm just going to reappear, like things like that. But Christians view time as linear,
Mm-hmm.
not circular. We know there's a beginning. We know there's an end coming, and yet, like you mentioned, in my finite brain, I can't comprehend it. And so I don't think about the end.
Yeah.
Like we don't think about, I'm going to stand before a holy God one day.
Right.
We know it.
Yeah,
We preach it.
Depth of knowledge one.
Yeah,
I
but
have the knowledge.
Yeah, but it's like when you read the book of Revelation, you see elders casting their crowns, you see angels falling on their face, right? You see all this stuff. It's like, man, that's awesome. And you're like, I'm gonna have to stand before God one day, right? That
Yeah.
kind of thing. Yeah, it's huge, and we can go on forever. Point number 3, the time, and we get back to this linear time, circular, whatever time. It came time. I've been stuck on time, right? It came time for her to give birth. On the surface, this looks like a moment of Caesar Augustus putting out a decree, Joseph going to Bethlehem, right? It's just kind of all plays out. But if you look deeper into it, God is the one who controls history, controls the time, places, things that we experience. Go to Acts 17, look at that. I mentioned Psalm 31. David writes, my times are in your hand. He's
Yeah.
talking to God.
Yeah.
Jesus would reference a passage from this chapter, Psalm 31, into your hands I commit my spirit. But David, through the ups and downs, highs and lows of life, recognizes, how about that? Recognizes his time, his days are in the hands of God.
Yep.
The moment that Jesus was born wasn't by a decree, it wasn't by accident, it wasn't just by happenstance, nor was the fact that he was born in a cave, right? A stable, a manger, happenstance,
Sure.
right? It came time for God to bring forth the redemptive plan, right? It's beautiful.
Yeah.
If
Fulfills all the prophecies.
it's,
It's just all connected.
It's amazing. And I would love to go deeper into the whole time thought, but we don't have a whole lot of time to do that today. There's a Charles Spurgeon quote. I would really want to read it, but it's long. What do you think?
Read it.
I'm going to read it. It's long, so bear with us. But you can Google this. Google Psalm 31, Charles Spurgeon. You'll find it. He says this about this little blip, my times are in your hands. He says this: the psalmist now stays himself upon a grand old doctrine, one of the most wonderful that was ever revealed to men. He sings, my time are in thy hands. This to him was a most cheering fact, a joyful fact, right?
Mm-hmm.
He had no fear as to his circumstances, since all things were in the divine hand. He continues, the great truth is this: all that concerns the believer is in the hands of the Almighty God. My times, these change and shift, but they change only in accordance with unchanging love, and they shift only according to the purpose of one with whom is no variableness nor shadow of a turning. Meaning he doesn't change. God doesn't change.
Right.
He says, my times, that is to say, my ups and my downs, my health and my sickness, my poverty and my wealth, all these are in the hand of the Lord, who arranges and appoints according to his holy will the length of my days and the darkness of my nights. Storms and calms vary the seasons at the divine appointment. Whether times are reviving or depressing remains with him who is Lord both of time and of eternity, and we are glad it is so.
Because if it weren't,
Yeah.
we would just be on a rock spinning here.
in chaos,
And, yes.
or in that never-ending cycle, right, of nothingness. And
I almost mentioned this earlier when you were talking about how J.I. Packer's stuff blew your mind. This idea of, am I in control? Am I out of control? That can be scary, and I've talked about this on this podcast before. For me, as a Christian, I align with what Spurgeon's saying here, because while I think if I'm worried about control, if I'm worried about what's going to happen, where's my all the worriness that comes with
stress
life,
out, anxiety, all
and
that
you
stuff.
get so overwhelmed with everything. But I think there ought to be, for the Christian, peace therein.
Yeah, I think it's perspective, right?
Yes,
perspective.
Good call.
Sorry, I get anxious when I try to rule.
Yes. Absolutely. When I want to control things.
And I don't have the capacity to rule my life, if that makes any sense.
It totally does.
But it also takes out, there's a lot in there, because like, I'm the master of my domain, right?
Right.
I'm the captain of my ship, things like that. No.
Yeah.
You're not. And when you get sick, right? When somebody gets a diagnosis, when somebody dies instantly, like, you realize I don't have control.
Right.
At any moment, this could be my last, right?
I find this, like, just on a practical level, like the most impactful to me when I get angry about something that happens that I didn't foresee or expect, or, when I place expectations.
Oh, yeah.
Basically. Like, there's
when I come, it's,
Yeah.
sorry, I'm just,
No, it's okay.
it's another way to say it is like, when I play out what's going to happen in my mind, and I think that's what's going to be the outcome, and then it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
That's when I get off the rails, right?
Me too.
Go
And
ahead.
mine typically expresses itself in frustration or anger.
Mine's
and,
facial expression.
And I'll fly off the handle, or I'll get mad, and I'll think I got to teach them a lesson, not in the sense of vengeance, but in the sense of it needs to go this way, and you need to understand why my way is better.
Yeah.
And I lose patience, and I think that just for me, like the day to day, how does this impact me day to day? What you preached, or just this study or this podcast. For me, it is when I lose perspective. That's a beautiful word, Ryan. On my place in all this.
Yeah.
And when I lose it, when I think that I'm the master of my domain or whatever it may be, and things aren't going accordingly, then I get stressed and I get frustrated and I take it out on people. And, that's so the opposite of how a Christian ought to live and bask in the glory of a God who is sovereign and works all things for his glory.
Yeah. There's a punk song, a Christian punk band called Dogwood.
I don't know them.
Go back and look at it.
I'm gonna.
One of their songs is Paper Boat, I think. But in the song, he's like, I'm the captain of this paper boat, right? So he's in a boat made of paper on the sea, and he's sinking, right? And he needs God, right? It's a really cool song. My kids know it by heart. As soon as it starts, they would be able to sing it. It's cool. It's cool. It's old, like 90s maybe, early 2000s. God has given us the ability to think, move, breathe, all that stuff, to make decisions, to rule, right, as we see, but he is the one in control.
Yeah.
We're never going to understand that fully, but it's amazing. It gives me a peace, it gives me a hope, right? But it also makes me humble that, like, even though things don't go my way, God's still going to work all this stuff out for us to go, as long as we're not trying to be heretics, right? It's still going to play out the way God has ordained it.
Hey, thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
That's a good conversation.
It's a good talk. Hey, today, November 29th, 1942. This is it.
Okay.
Coffee was rationed. World War II.
Yeah.
Coffee was rationed.
Man.
And one of the historians says this about it. You could argue that coffee is something that helped influence the victory of the democracies in World War II because we had it and the Axis didn't. That was a historian.
I would tend to agree with that.
Because
I'm
we
a
had
big
coffee.
caffeine guy.
Yeah, but think about the Germans. They had heroin, right, and methamphetamine, right? So, but coffee's better.
Yes, it is.
So turn to coffee. Hey, love God.
Love people.
Make disciples.
disciples.